Jetpack Joyride, a game which defined a generation, which many people look back on with fond nostalgia, with hundreds of millions of downloads across all stores combined, making it one of the most popular mobile games of all time. The game involves flying through a lab with a machine gun jetpack whilst avoiding missiles and zappers, with cool vehicles, events and missions, without forgetting its iconic soundtrack of course. The game also stands as an example for mobile games to follow, showing that a simple idea can completely blow up in popularity. But if there's one thing I don't see asked enough on YouTube and elsewhere, is what's the development story behind this game and how was it created? So today, in my first episode of my new series, From Concept to Release, I'll be covering this industry-defining game, whilst also mentioning some key points in the game's history. So, get ready to pull up your sleeves and equip your jetpack, as I'm going to cover Jetpack Joyride from concept to release. Our journey begins around late 2010. Halfbrick Studios had just released Fruit Ninja on Monster Dash earlier that year. Whilst on one hand, Fruit Ninja was doing exceptionally well for Halfbrick, on the other hand, Monster Dash wasn't doing quite as well. Luke Muscat, the creator of Fruit Ninja, Monster Dash and Jetpack Joyride, wanted to create a new game due to the sales of Monster Dash declining. In this new game, Luke and the team wanted to create an endless runner game like Monster Dash, which was simple and only required you to tap on the screen, allowing people to play the game easier. The team initially saw the Machine Gun Jetpack power-up from Monster Dash as a potential main mechanic for the game, as all of the team really liked it, due to it being quite badass and fitting into the concept very well. After some more brainstorming, the first prototype for the game was compiled, and yeah, you can definitely tell it's a basic prototype, with its bare minimum graphics and being heavily inspired from iCopter. However, it does share some similarities with the final version. After all, this prototype was made in a day, so you can't really expect that much from it. Whilst showing the prototype to some Halfbrick employees, Luke saw that the game could be quite competitive socially, because the group of employees he was showing it to were all trying to beat each other for the highest score. This small side project was originally set to be a modified version of Monster Dash, which would be released in 4 weeks, featuring the Machine Gun Jetpack as the main mechanic, and not a power-up. It was not viewed as Halfbrick's next big title at this point in development. The team from this point began working on the project, with new mechanics starting to be implemented, and 3 days later, this was the next prototype, and this one is actually very similar to the final game. You can see coins have been finally implemented at this point, along with lasers, a distance counter, and zappers being introduced, as well as Barry being implemented, along with some slightly different clothing for him. You can also see that the lab was introduced at this point. Scientists were also not present, they were added later on for aesthetic reasons. Poor scientists. The team also wanted to utilise procedural level generation, which would make the game more difficult the further you got, by speeding up the game and increasing the chance of missiles, zappers, and laser spawning. Other endless runners and Halfbrick games, such as Fruit Ninja and Monster Dash, also utilised this. Instead of having pre-made levels like other games such as Angry Birds and Cut the Rope, they wanted to utilise this, as they only had a few level designers and wanted more people to work on other aspects of the game, which would speed up development, as they wanted it done in 4 weeks at this point. The developers also made sure to cut some of the emotional cost of dying in Jetpack Joyride, like they did in other games such as Fruit Ninja, giving the player a fruit fact and had a picture of Sensei smiling at you as if he was proud of the player's run. As it wouldn't be the best idea if the game just said, "Game over, you suck at this game." The last thing they want to do is turn players away from the game. In Jetpack Joyride, they did this by adding the slot machine, which you may sometimes lose at, however, it could give you a second chance to resume your run. It also serves as a distraction from the overall feeling of losing. The Polaroid photo also acts as a distraction too, as well as leaderboards and high scores. One thing that the developers did though, was change Barry from instantly disintegrating when hitting a zapper or laser, into sliding across the floor, which would give the player a chance to collect some more coins, spin tokens, or complete a mission before the game's over. This also did somewhat reduce the emotional impact. Christmas 2010 was the time where the next major build of the game was released to employees and testers over the Christmas break, to allow them to play it in a relaxed environment. As you can see from these screenshots, the game was titled Machine Gun Jetpack instead of the final game Jetpack Joyride. You can also see that the title screen originally intended on Barry breaking through a glass window and grabbing the jetpack, instead of him breaking through the left wall. This build also saw the idea of the shop be introduced, although I'll talk about the shop later on in the video, as it had multiple potential designs during development. On these gameplay screenshots, you can see that this build looks very close, in fact almost identical to the final game, only being a few weeks old. The design of the laboratory also looks different, along with the coin counter being missing. Barry also looks identical to his final design. The game at this point also had its 16-bit Sega Genesis inspired art style. Items which added meters to the player's score, similar to spin tokens, were still in the game on the original prototype, although later removed. The way the developers playtested the game with Halfbrick employees was that they treated it as if it was a final release, by putting it on the employees' iPhones and allowed them to give feedback, and updated it every 2 weeks, from the tester's request, and they also made posters to show what's new in the game, as if it was a full release. The developers also approached people in the public and asked them to play the game for a short period of time and give feedback about it. This also told the developers if people were getting to grips with the game, and if it was simple enough. After the Christmas 2010 playtest, the developers found some issues that they needed to address. One was that the game clearly needed more time, and that it wouldn't be finished within 4 weeks, as it needed some more refinements and changes. Also saw that fans were already discussing online what the follow-up to Fruit Ninja would be, and the developers saw that releasing a small modification to Monster Dash wasn't the right move, and it wouldn't even come close to Fruit Ninja's success. So, the team decided to turn the game from a small release into a major release like Fruit Ninja, and doing this meant the developers need to spend more time refining it and making it the best it can be. On the other hand, the playtesters also found some issues with the game, one being that the game felt super hard and intense, with no low pointing the pacing, with the player only being one step away from death. The game also didn't have enough variety, with players burning out fast and getting bored of the game. To solve the intensity issue, the developers tried implementing a free heart system like Monster Dash. However, they didn't think it worked very well with Jetpack Joyride. They even tried implementing a first-person shooter type hit system where the screen would start going red. However, that didn't fit in either. To solve both problems, the developers decided to introduce power-ups. However, the team continued to struggle, as the game was so simple, it was difficult creating power-ups which suited the game. The developers then considered to add more variety that the power-ups had to change the controls, and this is where the vehicles were introduced. The vehicles allowed Barry to take control of a gravity suit or become housed in a teleporting machine which had all different controls, and every time you get hit, when you're in a vehicle, Barry stays alright, but you lose the vehicle, and you can also equip a different vehicle later, so it adds more variety without being cruel on the player. So, the variety issue is solved. The developers also added multiple vehicles to give the player a different experience each time they play, so it doesn't get repetitive. They didn't add too many vehicles either, so if the player has a favourite, they can equip it from time to time. Also, when Barry gets into a vehicle, nearby zappers and missiles get shut off, so it gives the player some breathing space, solving the intensity issue. Also, when Barry gets into a vehicle, the game also generates a unique set of coins for the player to reach, which can only be accessed by vehicles. This unique set of coins also kinda acts as a mini tutorial for each vehicle in a way, such as the coin layout for the gravity suit. A few months later at a 2011 Game Developers Conference or GDC, Jetpack Joyride, known as Machine Gun Jetpack, was announced as Halfbrick's next big game. The conference also marked as the first major playtest of the game outside of Halfbrick's offices. This was also the first time where the new vehicles were showcased to the public, and from the playtest, the developers saw that for the longer someone was in a vehicle, the more difficulty they had controlling it, which is what they anticipated. At this point in development, the game was getting very close to completion, and Halfbrick began experimenting with the game by adding more features and setting out some goals for the game. One goal was that with Jetpack Joyride, they wanted to make the game unique and simple enough that players would keep playing the game and wouldn't get bored of it, and would have a different experience each time instead of a repetitive experience. The developers also began implementing microtransactions into the game, whilst not pestering the player with them, which most people appreciated, though money wasn't their main goal of the game. The main goal was for Halfbrick to see the benefits of it. The next major stage of development was preparing the shop, despite being present in the game since early development. With the shop, the developers wanted to give the player another goal, instead of trying to get the highest score every time, so that they'd have to try and collect coins to spend in the shop. The shop was also implemented to allow players to express themselves and give each player a unique experience, having different jetpacks, clothing items, different vehicles, and many more. I'll be comparing these early versions of the shop to its launch state, and not its updated interface as we know it today. This is the first ever version of the shop, and as you can see, it looks very similar to the Fruit Ninja shop, with some mock-up clothing items. This other prototype for the shop shows a different look, however, was scrapped due to it being hard to navigate on mobile devices at the time. This other prototype features the category split into different tabs on the left, which does look more visually appealing than the other previous designs. In fact, this design was somewhat reused in the shop's current updated form. But still, the devs thought it was a bit too visually appealing, so they pushed the item description into a separate pop-up. This design was featured in the GDC 2011 build of the game, but it just still didn't suit the game at this point in development. At this point, the developers tried looking for some inspiration from the old skeuomorphic App Store design, and this prototype was introduced, which still retains the tabs, however, was less colourful, with two main categories, For Sale and My Stuff. This next prototype of the shop implemented a horizontal design, which looked even more like the App Store. This design also retained the For Sale and My Stuff categories. Eventually, the developers decided to put the categories and items on different screens, which the launch version utilises and is most known among players. This version is definitely the best out of the bunch, due to it looking less like the App Store design despite still utilising the colour tone and glossy icons, and looks easier to read and navigate on the phone for the time. Bear in mind phones still had 3.5-inch displays, item descriptions dropped down and didn't pop up instead. The mission system was something the developers wanted to implement into the game. The developers got inspiration for missions from the objectives in Tiny Wings, a separate mobile game. However, wanted to implement it into Jetpack Joyride by the player completing missions to eventually level up and earn a reward, therefore encouraging them to complete missions. Developers originally tested 3 mission systems: daily, optional and progressive, created 3 separate builds of the games with the different mission systems, and gave them to each third of Halfbrick's employees to test. The daily system was where every day you'd get 3 new missions, so if the player was stuck on a mission, they could come back the next day and try a new mission. Optional system was where players could choose one of 2 missions to complete, with one being hard and one being easy. The progressive system, which is closest to the final mission system, gave the player XP after completing a mission, which can level up the player's account, although XP in the final version was replaced with stars. Obviously, the employees of Halfbrick preferred the progressive system, as both the daily and optional systems had their flaws. Originally, when a player leveled up, you could either choose between 2,000 in-game dollars or see what's in a mystery box, which could have a really good award or a really bad one. This system didn't quite work very well with the progressive system. As the missions got harder, the reward stayed the same, so it was scrapped in favour of a coin reward, which gets higher every time you level up. Missions ended up becoming a major mechanic for the game, as it kept players addicted because of the rewards increasing every time, encouraging them to spend their coins in the in-game shop. Different badges were also introduced for players to unlock, originally inspired from Call of Duty Prestige badges, although the developers originally thought that the badges would be really hard to earn. However, once the game launched, many casual players started unlocking badges, which was a major surprise to the devs. The mission system took around 3 months to develop and get right, making it the longest part of the game to develop as far as we know. One thing about Jetpack Joyride which really stood out from the developers about the game was the engagement levels. People were originally playing the game all the time. The levels were even higher than its predecessor, Fruit Ninja, which showed the developers that this game could have a real good chance of becoming one of Halfbrick's best titles, not the whole industry's best titles of all time. So after months of development and getting everything right and to a stable point, the game was ready to release around mid-2011. However, the developers wanted to find a way to keep the game under 20 megabytes in size, and for it to look good across all devices from the iPhone 4 with its Retina display to the iPad, whilst also keeping it at a stable 60 frames per second. They couldn't cram 4 times larger sprites into the game, as it would exceed the size way above 20 megabytes, so instead, someone at Halfbrick added a feature where upon first boot, the game would detect where you have a Retina display, and would scale the sprites there, therefore allowing them to look good on Retina displays, keeping the installation size of the game down. The scaler would also decrease the sprite quality on some older devices as well. At this point, Halfbrick were pretty much ready to release the game. However, there was one small change that they needed to make, and that was the name. Yes, at this point, the game was still called Machine Gun Jetpack, but the name just didn't really represent the simplistic style of the game, and also, it wouldn't show up fully in App Store listings where it would just say Machine Gun. So, the developers really needed to change the name. At this point, the game was ready to release, and the developers had to come up with a new name fast, and the name Jetpack Joyride was born. On August 30th, 2011, the iconic trailer for the game was uploaded to YouTube, which really got fans hyped for the upcoming release. Then on September 1st, 2011, Jetpack Joyride was released onto the App Store and instantly took off in popularity, getting millions of downloads. However, Halfbrick made the decision to make the game free soon after. Downloads then instantly thrived even more, and the game soared to the top charts, and becoming not only one of Halfbrick's most popular games, but one of the most popular of all time. The story of Jetpack Joyride follows Barry Steakfries, previously starring in other Halfbrick games, who is a struggling gramophone salesman and eventually comes across the lab of legitimate science, and sees a machine gun jetpack as a way of escaping traditional life, where he must fly through the lab avoiding zappers, missiles and lasers. continuing to today, Jetpack Joyride is regularly updated with new events, features, vehicles, clothing, jetpacks and more, with notable updates being the Sam Armstrong update, Back to the Future and many more. The game even received a slight interface update after the launch. The game's success on iOS saw the game be ported to different devices such as the web, Apple TV, Android, Amazon App Store, PlayStation Portable, BlackBerry Playbook, PS3, PS Vita, BlackBerry 10, Windows Phone, and the PlayStation 4 soon after release. I'm certain there's also more ports of the game which I haven't mentioned too. A really cool arcade game version of the game also exists, which I really want to see in person someday, as the theming on it looks absolutely amazing. Anyway, that brings us to the end of this video. From concept to release, we looked at the development story behind Jetpack Joyride, and even almost 9 years later, the game is still being regularly updated and has an active player base, and unlike mobile games from its era, it hasn't really decreased in quality, and hasn't really followed current market trends, which is what many people including myself want to see. Jetpack Joyride is without a doubt one of the most iconic parts of mobile gaming, and I hope Halfbrick manages to keep the game around for future generations. Thank you all so much for watching this episode of From Concept to Release. If you want to help support my channel, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. Sharing the video online also helps massively too. Also, I'd like you guys to check out Luke Muscat's 2011 GDC conference, where he talks about his experience developing Jetpack Joyride. This video definitely wouldn't have been possible without it, and it's an overall great watch, so the link to that is in the description if you want to watch it. What would you guys like to see me cover in episode 2? Or what's your favourite Jetpack Joyride jetpack? Let me know in the comments. My Twitter, Instagram and Discord links are in the description, and as always, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.